Dust Hollow wasn't much to look at, just a stretch of dirt road cutting through brittle grass, a cluster of worn wooden buildings, and a sky so wide it made you feel small just breathing under it. Time moved slow there, like molasses sliding down a tin spoon. The people were just as slow to change. Old grudges clung to the town like the dust that caked its windows, and on that scorching Saturday, the town gathered for something that hadn't happened since the last drought, the annual Dust Hollow charity auction. The square was packed. Folks came from neighboring towns to watch her bid. Chickens clucked in cages, pies sat on tables, and old tools were polished and propped up like treasures. The mayor, a sunburned man with a handlebar mustache and a stammer, called out items with exaggerated flair. Everything was up for grabs: blankets, saddles, even a calf named Pickles. Then came the volunteer portion, where townsfolk offered a few hours of their time to be bought for chores, yard work, or just for laughs. All proceeds went to fix the leaking roof of the town's only schoolhouse. And that's when the mayor, shifting nervously on the wooden platform, cleared his throat. Next up, Miss Catherine DeWitt. Every head turned. Catherine strutted onto the platform like she owned it. Tall, golden-haired, skin like cream, and lips curled into a practiced smirk. She wore a starched white dress, pearl earrings, and gloves. Yes, gloves, despite the heat. She gave the crowd a little wave, though her eyes didn't hide the smugness. This wasn't charity for her. It was spectacle. Catherine DeWitt wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of Silas DeWitt, the richest rancher for miles. The DeWitts ran cattle, cotton, and just about every town vote. Everyone knew Catherine had a sharp tongue, a sharper nose for status, and a spine as stiff as her Sunday corset. And her reputation for looking down on the wrong kind of people, especially folks who didn't look like her, was no secret. A full hour of Miss DeWitt's time, the mayor said hesitantly. She'll help with chores, yard work, or, well, she's at your service. Someone in the back snorted. A few of Catherine's friends tittered. Starting at $1, the mayor said. 2, called out Tommy Jenkins, the town barber. 5, came from a local ranch hand, mostly as a joke. 10, said another. 20, shouted. A drunk in the crowd. 2 more laughter. Catherine rolled her eyes, clearly relishing the attention. She crossed her arms, chin high, enjoying the charade. Then a voice cut through the noise, low, deep, and steady. 100. The crowd hushed. Heads swiveled toward the edge of the square, where a tall figure leaned against a post, shadow falling across his face. He stepped forward, boots thudding against the dirt, spurs gently clinking. Jesse Langston. He was the only black rancher for hundreds of miles, wore a weathered hat, a faded duster, and always rode alone. Jesse was built like a man who carried weight not just on his back, but in his bones. Stories surrounded him like dust storms. Some said he'd been a Union scout. Others claimed he'd once faced down a gang of 10 outlaws without flinching. Nobody really knew, and Jesse didn't explain. He just worked his land, kept to himself, and tipped his hat when spoken to. Catherine's smirk froze. The mayor blinked. Mr. Langston, you're serious?" Jesse nodded once. 100. Catherine looked at her father, standing by the steps with his fists clenched. "You can't let this happen," she spat, panic rising. Silas DeWitt barked, "This auction's a joke. Jesse, don't get clever." But the mayor, sweating now, looked down at his gavel. "Well, rules are rules. No one else bids." Silence. The mayor hesitated, then slammed the gavel. "Sold. To Mr. Jesse Langston." A ripple went through the crowd like a gust of dry wind. Catherine's jaw dropped. You think this is funny?" Jesse didn't answer. He just walked toward the platform, eyes calm, face unreadable. "I'm not some servant," she snapped. her voice cracking. "You think you can parade me around, humiliate me?" Jesse tipped his hat. "I don't need to humiliate you, Mr. Witt. You've done that part just fine yourself." Gasps echoed. Catherine turned red then white. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You are." Jesse said coolly, "You agreed to the auction. Or are your words worth less than your pride?" The mayor stepped in. "It's an hour, Catherine. Just for the charity. Let's not make a scene." Her friends were watching. The crowd, too. Grinding her teeth, she yanked off her gloves and stepped down from the platform. "Fine," she hissed, not looking Jesse in the eye. "But when this is over, you'll wish you never tried to teach me anything." Jesse turned and walked toward the edge of town. She followed, fuming, not knowing the path she was stepping onto wasn't just dust and dirt but truth, fire, and change. The sun had dropped lower in the sky by the time Jesse Langston led his horse out of the hitching post near the edge of Dust Hollow. He didn't say a word as he tightened the saddle straps. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made even the wind hesitate. Catherine DeWitt stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, eyes blazing. Her once pristine white dress was now slightly dust-streaked, and her polished shoes were no match for the rocky trail ahead. Her golden curls had begun to wilt in the heat. "I'm not riding that thing," she said, gesturing with disgust at the spare horse Jesse held by the reins. Jesse didn't look at her. "Then you can walk," she scoffed. "Excuse me, you heard me. It's an hour ride. You're welcome to use your pride as a pillow when your feet start bleeding." She opened her mouth to protest, then saw the crowd still watching from behind, some laughing, others whispering. Her jaw clenched. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction. With a frustrated grunt, she grabbed the reins, mounted the horse awkwardly, and nearly slipped sideways before finding the stirrups. Jesse mounted his own horse with practiced ease, then set off at a steady trot without waiting. Catherine scrambled to keep pace, cursing under her breath. The town shrank. Behind them, swallowed by the haze of distance and dust, they rode in silence. The only sounds were the horse's hooves against the dry earth and the occasional chirp of a lone bird overhead. Catherine tried to ignore the discomfort in her legs and the growing heat, but as the trail twisted through scrubland and past creaky fences, a flicker of unease began to settle in her chest. "Where exactly are we going?" she finally asked. Jesse's reply was flat. "Where the truth lives." She snorted. "Oh, how mysterious." Jesse said nothing. Another 20 minutes passed, then another 30. The sun dipped toward the hills. Sweat trickled down her back. Her irritation simmered into fatigue, and fatigue slid into uncertainty. He hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken, cruelly hadn't tried to humiliate her. That was the most unsettling part. Finally, as dusk approached, Jesse slowed his horse and pointed to a cluster of leaning fence posts in the distance. Behind them stood an old house, weather-beaten, with a sagging roof, broken windows, and paint long peeled away by time. Near the house was a patch of uneven ground marked with crude stones. A graveyard. "What is this place?" she asked. Jesse dismounted. "My family's land." Catherine hesitated, then followed. She stepped down, legs sore, and walked stiffly behind him toward the porch. The wood groaned under their weight. Inside, the house smelled like dust, smoke, and something older, like memories left in sunlight too long. The walls were lined with artifacts, yellowed documents and frames, faded photos, rusted chains, and a Civil War Union jacket draped over a wooden chair. Catherine's eyes fell on a photo of a stern-looking black woman standing tall beside the very house they now stood in. One arm was missing, and her other hand held a book. "That's my grandmother," Jesse said, his voice softer now. "She was born in chains, bought with silver, escaped with scars, and built this house with her bare hands." Catherine blinked. That's real. Jessie nodded. Every chain you see on that wall, she broke one. Every letter in that frame, she wrote by candlelight, teaching others to read in secret. Catherine turned slowly, eyes scanning the room again with a new lens. You brought me here for what? A history lesson? Jessie leaned against the doorframe. No. Brought you here to show you something most folks in town never cared to see. What it took for me to exist. For any of us too. She looked at the graves outside. Your family, generations, buried here, never got a statue, never had a street named after them. But they made something from nothing. Catherine stood still, the weight of silence pressing down like the dusk around them. You bought me, she said, quieter now. But you didn't make me do anything. You didn't make a fool of me. I didn't need to, Jessie replied. Sometimes the worst punishment is just seeing the truth. Catherine didn't sleep much that night. Jessie had rolled out a bedroll for her near the fireplace. She was used to feather mattresses and silk sheets, not scratchy wool and creaky floorboards. But it wasn't the discomfort that kept her awake, it was the silence. Not just the kind that filled a quiet house, but the kind that echoed inside her, gnawing at everything she thought she knew. The fire in the hearth crackled gently. Jessie sat nearby, tending to it with practiced ease. Outside, coyotes howled. In the distance, their cries carrying across the land like ancient ghosts. Catherine stared at the ceiling, then finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Jessie didn't look up from the flames. Doing what? This whole thing. Bringing me here. Showing me your family's past. You could have humiliated me in front of everyone. Most folks would have. He poked at the fire. I didn't. Buy you to get revenge. She scoffed, sitting up. Then why? To prove some noble point. He met her eyes now, his face lit by firelight. Because you needed to see what hate looks like after it survived the storm. She frowned. What does that even mean? Jessie stood and walked to the mantel. He took down a framed letter, yellowed and delicate. He handed it to her carefully, like it might fall apart in the wrong hands. She held it gently, eyes scanning the faded ink. To my dearest son Jesse, never let the fire in your chest go cold. Not the fire of hate, but the fire of truth. The world may try to bury you in lies, but truth burns through the dirt. And if you keep it alive, it'll light the way for someone else. Catherine's throat tightened. Your mother wrote this. She never finished school, but she taught herself how to write just so I'd never forget where I came from. Catherine looked down at the letter again. It was signed simply, Mama. Jessie returned to the fire. You ever wonder why folks like your daddy are so angry all the time? Catherine bristled. He's not angry. He's traditional. Jessie chuckled darkly. Is that what they're calling it now? She looked away, ashamed, not just of Jessie's words, but of how they hit something true inside her. I don't agree with everything he says, she muttered. But you believed it, Jessie said. Maybe still do. She didn't answer. The fire popped and snapped, sending sparks up the chimney. Jesse leaned back, his eyes distant. I used to be angry, he said. Thought it was the only way to survive. But Mama, she told me anger burns everything, even your own house. Truth, though, that kind of fire. It doesn't destroy, it forges. Catherine studied him, this man she'd mocked, dismissed, feared. Now he looked like someone carved from storms and sorrow, not weakness. She'd grown up calling men like him less than. But in this moment, he looked like more than anyone she'd ever met. She broke the silence. My father always said your people were better off when they stayed in their place. Jessie raised an eyebrow. And where's that place supposed to be? She swallowed. I don't know anymore. Good, he said. That means you're starting to think for yourself. She looked back at the letter. The edges curled like fire had kissed them long ago. Maybe it had, maybe the whole house had once burned with fury. And all that was left was truth, and Ash. Catherine set the letter down carefully, reverently. Why didn't you just throw me off your land? You could have told me to go to hell. Jesse's voice was quiet now, because if I'd left you in town, you'd still think you were the one on higher ground. She didn't reply. The fire in the hearth dimmed slowly, but the fire inside her, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable, grew. Hotter, not rage, not shame, something else, something like change. By morning, the wind had shifted. The heat from the day before was replaced by a cool breeze rolling across the prairie. The sky stretched clear and blue above the cabin, but inside, the air still felt thick with the weight of things unspoken. Catherine stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching the field sway like a sea of golden grass. She hadn't said much since breakfast. Jesse didn't press her. Eventually, he came out of the house, carrying a small wooden chest. It looked old, scarred by time, and sealed with an iron clasp. "I want you to open this," he said, setting it down on a table outside. She looked at it cautiously. "What's in it?" Jesse handed her the key, a part of the truth most folks never bother to learn. She hesitated, then knelt beside the box. The key clicked in the lock. As the lid creaked open, the scent of cedar and age drifted out. Inside were bundles wrapped in linen, carefully folded and placed with reverence. She lifted the first bundle and unwrapped a small, leather-bound Bible. Inside the cover was a name, written in neat, curved handwriting: Eliza Langston, Jesse's mother. The next bundle contained a silver wedding band, dulled by time, still warm in her palm. And beneath that, a torn piece of fabric, dress, maybe, or part of a bonnet. Stitched into the corner were tiny initials, EL, but it was the last item that made Catherine pause. A notebook. The edges were frayed, and the leather cover was cracked, but when she opened it, the writing inside was bold and careful. Each page bore names, dates, notes. Tobias Freeman, age 8, taught him the letter J today. He said it stands for justice. Ruby Gaines, age 11, drew a picture of the school she wants to build. Josiah said he wants to be a preacher. I told him he already sounds like one. Each line was like a breath from the past, full of hope, courage, and quiet resistance. These were the children she taught, Jesse said, watching her. Right here, at night, by lantern light, in secret. Catherine turned the pages slowly, hands trembling slightly. Some of them went on to start businesses, others led churches. A few couldn't escape the violence, but they were all part of something bigger. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "And no one knows their names." "No," Jesse said, "because people like your father made sure they wouldn't." She flinched at that, but she didn't deny it. "I used to think history was just what's written in books," she murmured. "It is," Jesse said, "but it depends on who's holding the pen." Catherine held the journal close to her chest like it might disappear if she didn't. "I don't understand how people can carry that much hate for so long, across generations." Jesse leaned against the porch rail. "Because it's easier to hate than it is to face the truth. Hatred gives people a reason to feel powerful without earning it." She nodded slowly. "My father used to say, blood remembers its place. I used to believe that. Does it still?" She paused. "No, I don't think it ever did. I think people just put it where they wanted it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the grasses. Birds circled above, and the world felt wider than it ever had to Catherine. Then she asked, "Can I keep this?" "The journal." Jesse gave a single nod. "It was meant for people willing to carry the truth forward." She looked down at the names again, tracing one with her fingertip. "You think I'm capable of that?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward and placed something else into her hands, a piece of blank parchment. "That depends on what you write next." 3 days had passed since Catherine DeWitt was bought at the charity auction in Dust Hollow, but to her, those days felt like a lifetime. The white dress she had worn with pride was now stained, torn slightly at the hem, and wrinkled beyond. Her hair, once carefully curled, was tied back in a simple braid. Her hands bore the signs of manual work, dust under her fingernails, a scratch across her palm, and in her satchel, wrapped carefully in linen, was the journal of Jessie's mother, a relic of hope she refused to let out of her sight. She sat on horseback now, riding beside Jessie as they neared the edge of town. The old wooden sign that read "Welcome to Dust Hollow" came into view. Below it, in smaller letters someone had once carved in anger and left to fade, were the words, "Know your place." Catherine stared at it as they passed, no longer unaffected. "Funny," she said quietly. "I used to think that meant everyone else but me." Jessie said nothing. He didn't need to dot as they approached the town square. The usual afternoon bustle came to a halt. People paused mid-step, heads turned, conversations died in their throats. There she was, the girl who once wouldn't even speak to the farmhands, now riding alongside. The one man she used to mock with dismissive glares. Jessie dismounted first and offered her a hand. She hesitated, then accepted the moment her boots touched the ground. Murmurs spread through the crowd. "She's back. What's she doing? With him, must have lost her mind." But Catherine didn't flinch. She walked forward, back straight. Face calm, not defiant, not proud, just certain. Jessie followed silently as she climbed the steps of the same wooden platform where the auction had taken place. The mayor stood nearby, confused and caught off guard. "I need to speak," Catherine said. He looked at her, uncertain. "Now might not be the time, Miss DeWitt." "It's exactly the time," she said. Then she turned to the crowd. "I came up here 3 days ago thinking I was doing this town a favor, a charity stunt. I thought nothing of it, because I was raised to believe that the world revolved around people like me." Uneasy murmurs rippled through the crowd. "My father taught me that blood meant worth, that skin meant status, that history was something you could rewrite with enough money." She paused, her voice steady now. "But in 3 days, I learned more than I ever did in 18 years on my daddy's ranch. I met a woman long gone now. Through her journal, she taught black children how to read in secret, how to dream in a world built to crush them." The crowd was frozen. Even her old friends stood slack-jawed. "I've seen the graves of people who were never allowed to have names in the school books. I've held the chains they broke with their own hands. And I realized," she looked around, her voice rising, "I was the one in chains, chained by lies, pride, ignorance." She turned and looked at Jessie. "And then a man I was taught to hate chose not to hate me back. He didn't shame me. He didn't mock me. He just showed me the truth. And that truth lit a fire I can't put out." Jessie nodded once, quiet but proud. The town was silent. No applause, no cheers. Just silence. And somehow, it was louder than any standing ovation. Catherine stepped down from the platform and walked back to Jessie. "What now?" she asked. "You'll see," he said. "The truth has legs. Let it walk." Dust Hollow did not take kindly to change. The silence that followed Catherine's speech didn't last long. By sundown, the town was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Whispers turned into grumbles, and grumbles into sharp words passed and hushed. Corners of saloons, church pews, and kitchen tables. The DeWitt name no longer shielded Catherine. Her father, Silas DeWitt, was furious not just at her words, but at the humiliation he felt. He sent word through a lawyer. She was no longer welcome at the ranch. Her accounts were frozen, her inheritance revoked. She received the news in Jessie's barn, where she'd taken up temporary shelter. The coldness of it didn't sting as much as she thought it would. "He's cut me off," She told Jessie that night. Jessie leaned against a support beam, sharpening a blade. Thought he might. I suppose I'm just another disappointment to him now. Jessie glanced up. Maybe you finally gave him a reason worth being disappointed about. Catherine smirked weakly. That's supposed to make me feel better. Nope. Jessie said, going back to his work. Just trying to keep you honest. She stayed quiet for a while, then asked, do you regret bringing me out here? Jessie looked her square in the eye. Not once. The backlash didn't stop with her father. Letters arrived at the cabin door, some unsigned, others scribbled with venom. Traitor. You'll regret siding with them. Don't show your face in town again. Even the church where Catherine used to play piano removed her name from the monthly bulletin. Her childhood friends crossed the street to avoid her. The same women who once complimented her dresses now whispered behind lace fans. But Catherine didn't run. She stayed. She woke with the sun and helped Jessie feed the animals. She learned to patch fences, clean stalls, and cut firewood. Her hands blistered, but she didn't complain. With every passing day, the girl who once scoffed at the sight of dirt slowly faded into someone new. One afternoon, she spotted a boy walking the edge of Jessie's land barefoot, shirt torn, holding a broken stick like a sword. Catherine recognized him from town. He was the son of a black seamstress, often chased away from shops by storekeepers. Hey, she called gently. What's your name? The boy froze, wary. It's all right, she added. I'm not gonna yell at you. He stepped closer, eyes curious. Isaiah, you like stories, Isaiah. He nodded. She reached into her satchel and pulled out Jessie's mother's journal. She had started reading it aloud at night. Now, she opened to a fresh page. Wanna learn how to write? Your name. He hesitated, then nodded again. She handed him the pencil. The next day, 2 more children came. By the end of the week, 5. Catherine turned Jessie's empty storage shed into a classroom just for crates, a chalkboard, and books she borrowed or bought with what little money she had left. Jessie watched from the porch one morning, arms crossed, chewing a blade of grass. You're not just reading the truth anymore, he said. You're planting it. She smiled. I figured, if one journal could change me, maybe I could help write the next one. He tipped his hat. Now you're thinking like a Langston. But the town didn't stay quiet. The local paper printed a scathing editorial accusing Catherine of spreading dangerous ideas. A few shopkeepers refused to sell her supplies. Her name became something folks only spoke in whispers. Still, she carried on. She started writing in the back of the journal herself, carefully adding names and notes. Isaiah wrote hope today in big letters. Mary said she wants to be a teacher one day. The more they tried to silence her, the louder her legacy grew. One night, after everyone had gone and the lamps were blown out, Catherine sat on the porch, journal in hand. Jessie sat beside her, quiet as always. She turned to him. Why me, Jessie? Why'd you choose me that day? He looked out at the stars. Because you were the one they least expected to change. And that's usually where the biggest fire starts. Months passed. The days were still hot in Dust Hollow, and the nights still whispered of secrets buried beneath its dry soil. But something in the air had shifted quietly, like the first cool breeze before a storm breaks. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was real. Catherine DeWitt had changed. And though the town tried its best to forget her, it couldn't. The shed on Jessie Langston's property had turned into something more than a classroom. The children, once scattered, overlooked, came each morning like clockwork. Some walked for miles. Others were dropped off by mothers who never dared speak above a whisper in town. They came for letters and stories and the quiet joy of being seen, but not everyone was pleased. One gray morning, Catherine stepped outside to find the classroom door smeared with red paint. The word traitor was scrawled across the boards. Jessie found her scrubbing it off with a rag and a bucket of well water. Her hands trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. "You want me to handle it?" he asked softly. "No," she said. "If I run from this, they win." By sundown, the door had been cleaned and repainted, this time with a small wooden sign nailed above it. Langston Schoolhouse. The town sheriff stopped by the ranch not long after. Slick-haired, sharp-eyed, and always too polite to trust, he stood, with his thumbs hooked into his belt as he looked Catherine over. "You really stirring up some dust, Miss DeWitt." "I'd call it sweeping," she replied without missing a beat. He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Folks are saying you're making this place dangerous, mixing up things that don't need mixing." Jessie stepped out onto the porch behind her. "Dangerous how?" he asked. "Teaching kids to read." The sheriff shifted. "You know how it is. Change rattles people." "Well, maybe they need rattling," Jessie said, stepping closer. "You done?" The sheriff gave Catherine a long look. "This town doesn't forget. You might want to remember that." He tipped his hat and walked away. Catherine turned to Jessie once he was gone. "They want to scare me. They're scared of you." One morning, Catherine sat down beside Isaiah, her first student, and asked him to write something of his own. Choosing, the boy hesitated, chewed his pencil, then scribbled carefully. When he turned it around, she smiled. It read, "I am not less." That night, she cried, not because she was afraid, not because she regretted anything, but because, for the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. Word of the schoolhouse spread beyond Dust Hollow. A black preacher from a neighboring town rode out to visit, curious to see if the rumors were true. He left with tears in his eyes and donated a box of books. A woman who once worked in the DeWitt kitchens quietly sent a crate of pencils and paper. Even one of Catherine's old friends, Sarah Lynn, sent a letter, unsigned, but with a single line, "I was wrong. You were brave." By fall, the schoolhouse had grown to 20 students. Jessie built a second room. Catherine taught 6 days a week and spent Sundays reading aloud from her favorite stories. The town never officially acknowledged her efforts. No parades, no church blessings. But something more powerful happened. People watched and listened and remembered. They saw a woman who had once walked with her nose in the air, now kneeling in the dirt teaching children no one else had time for. They saw her lose everything she thought gave her value: her name, her money, her status, and gain something untouchable. Respect. Not from society, but from truth. Years later, when Jesse Langston passed, Catherine buried him beside his mother. Under the cottonwood tree behind the schoolhouse, she carved the headstone herself. It read, "Here lies a man who showed me the truth." She kept the journal beside her bed until the end of her days, when she died. The children, now grown, gathered to rename the school officially the Langston DeWitt School for Hope and History. And though the town still didn't say her name out loud in polite company, her story traveled in quiet waves through dusty roads, worn pages, and the mouths of children no one dared call less again.